Don't go. Your driver has a gun. Amara Johnson said it without looking up, her fingers steady as she straightened the navy silk tie at Charles Whitmore's collar. He went still. She stepped back, smoothing the tie once more, giving him the smallest nod. Her role was finished. The warning had been delivered. Charles didn't ask questions. He didn't raise his voice. Cancel the car, he said calmly, eyes fixed ahead. And call Daniel. Now. A junior assistant froze near the staircase. Sir? You heard me. Charles turned toward his study. After 2 steps, he stopped and looked back at Amara. Just once. In my office, he said. Immediately. Her heart was already pounding by the time she followed him upstairs. Only an hour earlier, she had been pushing her cleaning cart down the west hallway, moving quietly, as she always did. 6 months working in this house had taught her one thing above all else. Silence kept you invisible, and invisibility kept you safe. That was when she saw Victor. The driver wasn't supposed to be upstairs, especially not at 6:10 a.m. Amara slowed, instincts flaring. Victor stood outside Charles Whitmore's private bedroom, glancing over his shoulder before slipping inside. The door didn't fully close. Her first thought was simple confusion. Her second was fear. She waited, listened. There was the faint sound of drawers opening, metal shifting, not the careful movements of a man tidying, but the hurried, searching motions of someone looking for something specific. Amara's chest tightened. Charles was meticulous. No one entered his bedroom without permission, not staff, not security, not even family. She should have turned back, should have minded her business. Instead, she stepped closer. The floorboard betrayed her. The soft creak echoed in the hallway, far louder than it had any right to be. The sounds inside the room stopped instantly. A second later, the door flew open. Victor loomed in front of her, eyes sharp, face already twisted with anger. Up close, she noticed things she hadn't before: the tension in his jaw, the bulge beneath his jacket, the way his right hand hovered near his waist. What the hell are you doing here? He snapped. I was just cleaning, Amara said quickly, keeping her voice low. Mr. Whitmore's schedule. Don't lie to me, he hissed. You people always think you're invisible, sneaking around where you don't belong. The word "you people" landed exactly where he intended. Before she could step back, Victor shoved her. Hard. Her shoulder struck the wall, pain exploding down her arm as she slid to the floor. Her cleaning cart tipped, supplies clattering loudly against the marble. Victor leaned down, his face inches from hers. You saw nothing, he said. And if you say a word, you'll be sorry you ever set foot in this house. Got it? She nodded, forcing fear into her eyes, submission into her posture. He straightened, adjusted his jacket too carefully, and walked past her without another word. Amara stayed on the floor for a full minute after he was gone, breathing shallow, replaying every detail. The sound of metal, the way he'd checked the hallway, the shape beneath his coat, a gun. By the time Charles came downstairs at 8:12 a.m., perfectly on schedule, Amara had made her decision. She would not confront Victor. She would not report him to security without proof. In houses like this, accusations from people like her had a way of disappearing, but she could warn Charles. When he paused near the foyer mirror, she stepped forward, hands trembling just enough to seem natural. Sir, she said softly, your tie. He allowed it, distracted, already thinking about meetings, markets, numbers that bent at his will. That was when she leaned in and whispered the words that changed everything. Now, in his study, Charles Whitmore closed the door behind them. Start from the beginning, he said. Amara did. Briefly, clearly, no dramatics. She described seeing Victor enter the bedroom, the drawers, the shove, the threat. She did not exaggerate. She didn't need to. Charles listened without interrupting, his expression darkening not with anger, but with calculation. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment. You're certain? He said finally. Yes. Another pause. You understand what you're accusing him of? Yes. And you still chose to warn me? Yes. That seemed to settle something. He nodded once. A knock came at the door. Daniel, head of security, entered. Already tense. Sir, we found a concealed firearm under the driver's seat. Unregistered. Victor's carrying a second weapon on his person. He's in custody. End quote. Charles exhaled slowly. Good. Daniel glanced at Amara, curiosity flickering in his eyes. Charles followed his gaze. She saved my life, he said simply. Daniel's expression shifted respect, then understanding. He nodded and left them alone again. Charles turned back to Amara. You shouldn't have had to handle that, he said. What he did to you this morning. I'm fine, she said, though her shoulder still throbbed. No, he replied quietly. You're not. And neither is this house, apparently. He studied her as if seeing her for the first time. Not as part of the staff, not as background, as someone who noticed things others missed. I want you with me today, he said. With you? In Manhattan? In a meeting? She hesitated. Sir, I clean rooms. And today, he said, you watched a man prepare to kill me and found a way to stop him without being seen. That's not cleaning. That's judgment. Amara met his eyes. For the first time since she'd fallen against the wall that morning, she felt something other than fear. Resolve. All right, she said. But if I come, I tell you what I see. Even if you don't like it. A corner of his mouth lifted. Deal. As she left the study, Amara realized something else had shifted, something quieter but just as dangerous. She was no longer invisible, and once seen, there was no going back. If you felt what Amara felt, hit like and drop your city in the comments. Someone near you might be watching too. The black SUV waited in the driveway, its engine idling low like a growl beneath the December wind. Amara stood at the front steps beside Charles. Not in a maid's uniform, but in a slate gray coat that belonged to one of his stylists. It fit surprisingly well. Her hair was pinned back, clean and sharp. She looked like she belonged. She didn't feel like it. Charles adjusted the cuff of his coat, then glanced at her. You ready? Amara nodded. As I'll ever be. The drive to Manhattan was silent. At first, a different driver, vetted, armed, and expressionless, handled the wheel. Daniel sat in the front passenger seat, typing constantly into a secure tablet. Amara sat beside Charles in the back seat, heart thudding with every mile closer to the city. She'd never been this close to power before. Not just wealth power, the kind of power that rewrote contracts with a signature, shifted markets with a nod. And now, she sat beside the man who held it in his palm, because he believed she saw something he didn't. What are we walking into? She asked softly. Charles didn't look at her. A negotiation. 3 firms want to merge into a single financial entity. I'm supposed to bless it. One of them, Oris Dynamics, tried to kill me yesterday. Amara stiffened. You think this is connected to Victor? I think nothing happens in isolation. He finally turned to face her. They've been pressuring me to greenlight this deal for months. I refused. I asked too many questions. The kind they don't like being asked. So why go today? He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Because sometimes showing up is the loudest warning. Amara glanced out the window. Skyscrapers began to rise around them, gleaming glass and stone, reflecting a sky that seemed colder the higher they went. This was not her world, but she'd been invited in. For now, the car pulled up to a discreet entrance beneath a high-rise on Park Avenue. Security greeted them, all familiar faces to Charles. No press, no fanfare, just business. As they stepped into the private elevator, Charles leaned closer. If anything feels off in that room, he said quietly, tell me. Don't second-guess it. I won't. He studied her for a beat longer, then nodded. The boardroom on the 45th floor looked like a museum piece, polished walnut table, custom leather chairs, walls lined with abstract art that probably cost more than most homes. But Amara didn't care about the decor. She looked at the men already seated, 7 of them, all white, all older, all in suits that whispered old money and sharper teeth. They rose when Charles entered. Some smiled, some didn't. Gentlemen, Charles said, his tone neutral. Let's begin. Introductions were brief. Amara remained silent, seated behind Charles and slightly to the left. They didn't ask who she was. They assumed she was a junior assistant or silent note-taker. That was good. Oris Dynamics was represented by Gerald Klein, a man with the air of someone used to being listened to. He smiled too wide, gestured too much, called Charles, my friend, 3 times in 5 minutes. Amara watched his hands. They never stopped moving, adjusting his pen, fiddling with his cuff, scratching the edge of a paper that didn't itch. His voice didn't match his body. She watched his eyes. When Charles mentioned the Whitmore Foundation's ethics board, Gerald blinked faster. His jaw tightened just slightly before returning to a smile. It was like watching a mask slip for half a second before snapping back into place. He's lying, Amara said quietly. Charles didn't react, didn't even turn his head, but his hand shifted, fingers tapping once against the table, his signal that he'd heard her. 10 minutes later, when the firms began discussing voting rights in the merger, Gerald steered the conversation quickly toward a streamlined ownership model. Charles interrupted him. Transparency, Gerald, he said coolly. That's the model I'm interested in. The room fell quiet for a beat too long. Gerald laughed. Of course, no secrets here. Amara leaned slightly closer to Charles and murmured. His assistant keeps glancing at his watch, and his briefcase hasn't left his side. I think he's recording. Charles nodded once, then addressed the room. Gentlemen, before we move forward, I'll need to sweep the room. Standard protocol, given recent events. It wasn't standard, and everyone knew it. But no one objected. Charles gestured. Daniel entered within 30 seconds, carrying a small detection device. Within minutes, a recording transmitter was found beneath the conference table directly below Gerald's seat. Gerald paled. The others went quiet. Charles stood slowly. His voice, when it came, was soft but deadly. Anyone who thinks they can manipulate this process by planting devices in my meetings will find themselves not only removed from this deal, but blacklisted from every financial circle I control. You'll be out of business by the end of the quarter. No one dared speak. Charles turned to Amara. Thank you, he said, clearly enough for the entire room to hear. They left without another word. Back in the elevator, Amara finally breathed. Charles looked at her. That was impressive. I just watched, she said. No, he replied. You saw. Outside, the city moved on, cars, people, headlines, but Amara knew something had shifted. She wasn't just a witness anymore, she was part of the chessboard. And now, the stakes were higher. The SUV rolled quietly through Midtown as the sky dimmed into a steel-gray dusk. Traffic pulsed like a living thing, indifferent to the billion-dollar battle that had just taken place behind closed doors. Inside the vehicle, silence reigned again, thicker now, charged with the residue of what had almost happened. Amara sat beside Charles, hands folded tightly in her lap. Her coat still held the faint scent of the cologne from whoever wore it last. But now it was mixed with something else. Adrenaline. She hadn't expected him to thank her. Not in front of everyone. Not like that. I shouldn't have spoken out loud, she said finally. Eyes focused on the passing blur of buildings. You were right, Charles replied without hesitation. And if you hadn't spoken, I'd be in negotiations with a man trying to bury me. She hesitated. They'll know it was me. Oh. They already knew you weren't just the help the moment you stepped into that room, he said. Now they'll know not to underestimate you. Amara glanced at him. I'm not looking to make enemies. Charles met her eyes. You just made powerful ones. But that's not always a bad thing. The car pulled into the underground garage of Whitmore Holdings' Manhattan office, a fortress of glass and steel that rose above Park Avenue like a blade. Inside, the lobby buzzed with suited staff, security checkpoints, and polished floors that swallowed footsteps. As they stepped into the executive elevator, Charles spoke without turning. I want you to meet someone. Who? Martin Greaves, head of compliance. Trusted him for years. He's thorough and doesn't panic. I want him to hear what you saw today. Amara frowned. I'm not sure I'd even know how to explain it. It wasn't evidence. It was feeling. Observation. 18 say. Charles pressed a button. Then tell it how you saw it. If he's worth his title, he'll understand. They exited on the 39th floor, where the decor was more subdued, deep grays, quiet art, the kind of restrained power only old money knows how to decorate with. Martin Greaves was already waiting, tall and wiry, with glasses that made him look like he missed nothing. "Mr. Whitmore," he greeted, then turned to Amara. "And you must be the sharp-eyed housemaid who ruined Gerald Klein's week." Amara stiffened, unsure how to respond. "Relax," Martin said, waving her into a seat. "I've been asking Charles for years to fire half the board and replace them with women like you." Charles chuckled. "She's not available. Pity." For the next 15 minutes, Amara recounted everything again, the shift in Gerald's tone, the glance to the assistant's watch, the way his hand hovered near the briefcase. Martin didn't interrupt once. When she finished, he leaned back and nodded. "You've got a clean eye." "No training?" "Only in watching people who want to hurt others," she said. "My dad taught me." Martin glanced at Charles, then back at her. "Keep trusting that instinct. It's gotten you farther than most." When they were alone again, Charles led her to his office, a space far more personal than the rest of the building. Framed photos of his late wife on a bookshelf, a dog-eared copy of The Art of War on his desk, a hand-blown glass sculpture by the window, catching what little light the winter sky allowed. "You handled yourself well today," he said, sitting. "I lost sleep over whether to say anything," Amara admitted. "I thought maybe I imagined it all. Maybe I was projecting." Charles shook his head. "Your hesitation saved us both. The best instincts always feel uncertain right before they're proven right." 18. Amara stepped toward the bookshelf, running her fingers along the spines of titles she'd never read but recognized: economics, military strategy, biographies of magnates and revolutionaries. "Why me?" she asked softly. "Why bring me in at all? You could have thanked me, paid me off, and never spoken to me again." Charles leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing. "Because most people in my world are blind, or worse, they see and choose to look away. You didn't." "Okay. I didn't think I had a choice." "Everyone has a choice," he said. "Most people choose comfort. You chose risk." A pause stretched between them. Then Charles added, "And I trust you." Amara turned, surprised. "You don't even know me." "I know enough." He stood, straightening his jacket. "Come with me. There's something else I want to show you." They rode back down to the underground level and into a side wing of the garage, where security clearance was required for every door. Charles punched in a code, and a sleek steel panel slid open. Inside was a private surveillance room, screens showing every angle of the estate, the offices, and several vehicles. One of them replayed footage from earlier that morning. Victor, entering the hallway. Victor, glancing both ways. Victor stepping into Charles's room. Another camera showed Amara. Coming around the corner, Charles didn't speak. He let her watch. Then he said quietly, "We're not done with Aurus dynamics." Victor was a piece, but not the whole game. He turned to her. "If you stay in this, you're going to be watched, followed, maybe threatened. You ready for that?" Amara stared at the screen where Victor shoved her, froze it with a tap, then looked at Charles. "I've been followed before, threatened too, but no one's ever asked me to fight back, until now." Charles nodded slowly. "Then we move forward." As they exited the room, a thought flickered across Amara's mind, a quiet, uneasy truth she hadn't admitted until now. She wasn't afraid of what she was stepping into. She was afraid of what it might awaken in her, the part of her that wanted to change more than just one man's fate. The Whitmore estate felt different that night, not quieter, if anything. Security had doubled, footsteps more frequent in the halls but heavier, as if the walls themselves were listening. Amara noticed it the moment she stepped back inside after returning from Manhattan. The chandeliers glowed the same soft gold. The Persian rugs lay perfectly aligned, but the house no longer felt like a place that merely sheltered wealth. It felt like a place that anticipated danger. She moved through the service corridor toward her room, her shoulder still sore beneath her coat. The shove from that morning replayed itself in her body more than her mind. Now a dull reminder that seeing too much always came at a price. Her room was small but immaculate, functional. A bed, a desk, a narrow window overlooking the hedges at the east edge of the property. She sat down without turning on the light, letting the darkness settle around her. For the first time all day, she allowed herself to think. I could have stayed invisible. The thought came uninvited. It carried no regret, only weight. Invisibility had been her armor for most of her life. It was what had kept her safe when her father died and her mother learned how to fold grief into silence. It was what allowed her to move through spaces where people like her were meant to clean, not speak. And now that armor had cracked, a knock came at her door. She tensed instantly, then stood. "Yes? It's me," came Charles's voice. She opened the door halfway. Surprised. He stood there without his jacket, sleeves rolled up, looking less like a titan of finance, and more like a man who hadn't stopped thinking since morning. "I hope I'm not intruding," he said. "No," she replied quickly, stepping aside. "Please." He glanced around the room, taking in its simplicity without comment. "You don't have to stay here tonight," he said. "Not if you don't want to." Amara frowned. "Where would I go?" "There's a guest room on the 3rd floor, larger, closer to security." She understood what he wasn't saying, that Victor knew where she slept, that others might too. "I'll stay," she said after a moment. "Running makes things louder." "Yaps." Charles studied her, then nodded. "All right." He hesitated, then added, "I wanted to check on you, about what happened this morning." "I'm fine," she said automatically. He raised an eyebrow. She sighed. "I've had worse days," she amended. That earned a quiet, humorless smile. "That's not comforting." He leaned lightly against the desk. "My wife used to say that power reveals itself not when people speak, but when they assume they don't have to." Amara looked at him. "What do you mean?" "Victor assumed you wouldn't matter. Gerald assumed no one would question him. Oris assumed I'd play along because it was easier." His jaw tightened. "They all assumed silence, and they were wrong." "Yes," he said softly. "Because of you." The word sat between them, heavy and undeniable. Amara crossed her arms. "You keep saying that like it's a compliment, but people don't like being exposed, especially not people with money." "No," Charles agreed. "They don't, which is why I need to ask you something carefully." She met his gaze. "Ask. I want you to stay on." "Not as staff." He paused. "As part of my inner circle." Her breath caught, just slightly. "That's not how this works," she said. "I don't have the background, the credentials. You have perspective," he replied. "And perspective is the one thing this place lacks." She thought of the boardroom, of Gerald's restless hands, of Victor's sneer when he called her "you people." "And what does that cost?" she asked. Charles didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was lower. "Visibility." She nodded slowly. That, at least, was honest. "There will be resistance," he continued. "People who think you don't belong. People who will test you." "They already do," she said. A corner of his mouth lifted. "Then you'll do fine." Silence stretched again, but this time it was different. Not tense. Contemplative. "I saw the footage," she said quietly. He stiffened. "The surveillance?" "Yes." She didn't elaborate. She didn't need to. They both knew which moment she meant. "I should have intervened sooner," he said. "You couldn't have," she replied. "You weren't there." "That's never stopped me before." She looked at him then, not as her employer, not as a billionaire, but as a man wrestling with the limits of control. "You can't protect everyone all the time." "I know," he said, "but I can try." I echoed. A faint smile touched her lips, gone almost as quickly as it appeared. "That sounds exhausting." "It is." He straightened, glancing at his watch. "Tomorrow morning, I'll have Daniel walk you through security protocols. Phones, routes, emergency procedures." She nodded. "And after that?" "After that," he said, "you'll sit in on another meeting. Smaller, less formal. I want to see how you read the room, when the stakes aren't obvious. And if I see something wrong, then you say it. With created be as I. Even if it costs me?" she almost asked. Instead, she said, "All right." Charles turned toward the door, then paused. "Amara." "Yes, thank you," he said. "Not just for today, for choosing not to look away." After he left, Amara closed the door and leaned against it, heart pounding in a way that had nothing to do with fear. She thought of her father. Of the night he'd told her, quietly, that the world didn't reward fairness, only persistence. That justice, when it came at all, came sideways through people who refused to stay quiet. She lay back on her bed, staring at the ceiling. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel small. She felt seen. By 6:45 a.m., Amara stood in the private security wing of Whitmore Holdings, clutching a black coffee in her hands and trying to keep her nerves from showing. She hadn't slept. Not deeply. Every creak in the estate, every shadow crossing the hallway outside her door, kept her alert. Now, in the cold buzz of corporate lighting, she was surrounded by men and women in tailored suits and earpieces, people trained to anticipate danger before it reached the front door. She wasn't like them. And yet, she was here. Daniel entered the room with his usual sharpness-measured steps, pressed shirt, not a wrinkle out of place. He nodded at her, then gestured toward a side table covered in folders, gadgets, and monitors. "We're updating your clearance," he said. "You'll be issued a temp-level badge for now, no floor access without escort, but it puts you on the list. Officially. I didn't realize I was being added." "You're not being added," Daniel replied. "You're being noticed." She didn't respond. He handed her a folder with her name printed in bold across the top. "Read it," he said, twice. "This covers emergency codes, evacuation plans, how to identify surveillance sweeps, and internal communication protocols. You'll also memorize 3 safe houses in the city. You don't go home unless we say it's safe." Amara stared at the folder. "You're preparing for war." Daniel gave her a flat look. "A man tried to shoot Charles Whitmore. That's not business. That's a message. Which means someone's planning the next one." She nodded slowly. "And me? You're now a variable in someone's threat matrix. They'll want to know who you are, what you saw, and how close you are to Whitmore. Which means you have to decide something." "What's that?" "If you're going to play this game, you can't do it halfway." Amara looked up. "I've never done anything halfway in my life." Daniel studied her a moment, then offered something that resembled approval. "Good, let's begin." By 9 o'clock, Amara was back in the executive wing. Her new ID badge hung from her coat, though she kept it tucked out of sight. She moved through the quiet halls like a shadow, but one with a new kind of weight. Staff nodded at her differently, now confused, some surprised, a few even cautious. She passed the glass-walled office where Charles stood speaking with Martin Greaves and someone she didn't recognize. A woman in her 50s, elegant and composed, with gray streaks in her swept-back hair and a scar just beneath her ear. "That's Margaret Reese," said a voice beside her. She turned Daniel again, this time in a darker suit. "CIA?" Amara guessed. "Close. Former counterintelligence. Now an independent consultant." Charles brought her in after the board meeting. Quietly, Amara frowned. "He thinks there's more?" "He knows there's more." The door opened. Charles stepped out, spotted Amara immediately, and motioned for her to follow him. Inside, Margaret turned slowly. Her eyes were ice blue, clear and precise. She studied Amara in one long sweep. "So you're the one who saw what everyone else missed." Amara held her gaze. "I just paid attention." "Good," Margaret said. "That's where it always begins." Charles gestured for everyone to sit. "We're tracking more than just a rogue employee or a rival firm," he said. "There's chatter from a few of our international offices, unusual data requests, duplicate logins, and yesterday's security breach in LA. He handed Amara a tablet. On it was a paused image, grainy surveillance footage of a man entering a building at 3 a.m. Face obscured. "That's from a logistics partner we work with out west," Charles explained. "Someone accessed their database using a temporary code tied to our New York office. Only 6 people have that code." Amara blinked. "You think one of them gave it away?" Margaret leaned forward. "We think someone's already inside. We just don't know who yet." The room fell quiet. Charles broke the silence. "Which brings us to you, Amara." She straightened. "Sir? Today, you'll shadow 2 meetings. One with legal, one with facilities. On paper, you're just there to observe, but I want you watching everyone. Expressions, deflections, body language." Amara's stomach tightened. "You think someone in those meetings is involved?" "I think the leak didn't start with the man holding the gun. It started with whoever gave him a reason to pull the trigger. He rose. The others followed. As they left the room, Charles lingered at her side. Most people think betrayal happens in a burst of violence, he said. But it usually starts with a whispered favor. A small compromise. One door left unlocked. Amara looked up at him. And if I find that door, then we lock it, or burn the building down. The first meeting was uneventful. Legal staff, all rigid and cautious, discussed non-disclosure agreements, pending lawsuits, and merger language. Amara sat silently near the back, scanning their faces, watching for nervous tics or veiled looks, but there was nothing. Just paper and polished words. But the second meeting was different. Facilities operations, mid-level directors, more casual atmosphere, more chatter. One man, Ron Mitchell, talked too much. He laughed a second too long at Charles's joke. He corrected a junior staffer with a tone that bordered on disdain. But it wasn't until he showed a slide of upcoming renovations that Amara noticed something strange. A name. Wait, she interrupted. This vendor here, Greystone Systems. You said they were handling electrical refitting? Ron nodded. Yeah, good price. Vetted them myself. Amara's brows furrowed. I've seen that name before. On a service van outside the estate. Last week. No one mentioned an appointment. Ron blinked. They might have done a site survey. Charles leaned forward. Without clearance? Ron shifted. It was last minute. I authorized it. Thought I mentioned. You didn't. Charles said coldly. Margaret stood, already dialing a number. Ron began to sweat. Amara sat still, heart thudding. There it was. A door. Ron Mitchell sat at the far end of the polished glass table, blinking under the weight of Charles's silence. The conference room, once filled with low conversation and coffee cups, now felt like a courtroom. And Ron, the man in the witness chair, Amara watched him closely. His shoulders, once relaxed and leaning back in false ease, now hunched forward slightly. His hands, steady a moment ago, now tapped nervously against a closed laptop. He knew he had slipped. Charles didn't speak yet. He didn't need to. Margaret Reese stood beside him, phone pressed to her ear, speaking in clipped tones to someone on the security team. Full workup, Greystone Systems, all contracts, all recent logins, cross-reference badge access with site logs. Well, she ended the call and turned to Ron. How long has Greystone been contracted? Ron cleared his throat. Just under 2 months. Small job, electrical, nothing invasive. And yet they accessed the estate without security clearance? I thought it was handled. You thought wrong, Charles cut in. His voice was calm, which somehow made it worse. You bypassed protocol. You allowed a third-party group access to my home. You didn't log their presence. That's more than carelessness, Ron. Ron's face flushed red. It wasn't malicious. I swear. I was just trying to expedite a small contract. These merger meetings have been burning all my hours. Expedite or conceal? Amara asked suddenly. The room turned toward her. She hadn't meant to say it out loud, but the words had come anyway, sharper than intended, but true. Ron blinked. Excuse me? You've been in this company a long time, she continued. You know how Charles operates. Nothing gets signed without layers of approval. But you approved this vendor, quietly and conveniently. Their presence coincides with an attempted hit? That's a stretch. Ron snapped, the edge in his voice rising. She's not even. Charles stood. She is exactly what you think she's not, he said. And you'd do well to listen. Ron paled, realizing just how little ground he had left to stand on. Charles turned to Margaret. I want a forensic sweep of Ron's communication calls, messages, email servers. Get warrants if needed. If he's innocent, we'll clear him. If he's not, Margaret nodded, already typing. Ron looked around, realizing no one in the room was on his side. This is insane. I've been loyal to Whitmore Holdings for 15 years. Then you should have remembered how we value integrity, Charles said. He didn't yell. He didn't threaten. But his tone carved through the room like a scalpel. Daniel will escort you to a holding office, Margaret added, until this is sorted. Ron stood slowly, his breath shallow. You're making a mistake. No, Charles replied. You did. The meeting dissolved quietly after that. Amara followed Charles and Margaret back to his office, where silence hung like fog. Margaret took a seat, folding her arms. Even if Ron's clean, he gave someone a window. We'll trace the contract to whoever opened it, but it'll take time. Charles glanced at Amara. What do you think? She hesitated. He was hiding something, but I don't know if it's the thing we're looking for, which means we're still in the dark, Charles muttered. He turned toward the windows, watching the city like it might offer answers. Amara studied him for a long moment. Then, cautiously, she asked, "Can I show you something?" He turned. She pulled a small folded paper from her coat pocket and laid it on the desk. I didn't mention this before. I found it in the hallway outside your bedroom, tucked behind the baseboard. It wasn't there yesterday. Charles unfolded it. Inside was a name, a date, a set of coordinates. Margaret leaned over. That's a site in the Catskills. Remote, industrial. Old power grid location. Charles looked at Amara. You sure this is connected? I don't know. But Victor passed that hallway hours before I caught him in your room. He could have left it behind. Charles stared at the paper for several seconds. Then he reached for the phone. Daniel, prep a chopper. I want to be wheels up in 30 minutes. Margaret raised a brow. You're going in person? Charles nodded. If someone's leaving breadcrumbs, I want to see where they lead. He turned to Amara. You're coming too. Her eyes widened. Me? You've been right so far, he said. And I trust your eyes more than most. Amara swallowed. Her pulse kicked harder. All right, she said. The helicopter ride was fast and brutal, slicing through the wind as it lifted over the city and headed north. The Hudson River unraveled below them like a ribbon of shadow, mountains creeping up along the horizon. Amara sat beside Charles, her coat zipped to the chin, headset pressed against her ears. She'd never flown like this, never felt the hum of danger wrapped in money. Every beat of the blades was a reminder. She had stepped far outside her world. The facility came into view 20 minutes later, a long-abandoned power station surrounded by frozen woods. No lights. No obvious signs of life, but something felt off. The pilot circled once, then hovered low. Looks clear, he said. Want me to set down? Charles glanced at Amara. She scanned the ground. Her eyes landed on the far side of the structure, what looked like tire tracks in the snow. Fresh, leading into a side-loading dock, half obscured by trees. There, she pointed. Someone's been here, recently. Charles gave the order. The chopper touched down. As they approached the structure, accompanied by two of Charles's private security guards, the stillness of the place deepened. Birds didn't sing, the wind didn't whistle, and when they stepped inside, past a rusted door and into the cold belly of the building, they saw what they weren't supposed to see. Servers. Still running. Quiet hum. Surveillance footage. Real-time feeds. Not just of the estate, but of Charles's private bedroom, his office, and of Amara. Hundreds of still images, frozen on screens. Margaret whispered, "My God." Amara stared, stunned, as her own face stared back at her from a dozen angles. Every move she'd made for weeks recorded, documented. She reached for Charles's arm. "They're not just after you," she said. "They're watching me too. I can do." Charles stood perfectly still in the freezing dark, the blue flicker of surveillance monitors casting stark lines across his face. Behind him, Margaret was already scanning the servers, barking quiet commands into her encrypted phone. His two guards had fanned out, weapons drawn, clearing each corner of the decrepit power station. Amara remained frozen in place, her gaze locked on a screen that showed her asleep in her room. The angle, high, intrusive, wasn't from the estate's internal system. They installed something inside the house, she whispered, voice brittle. Charles stepped forward, his jaw set tight. The estate's security was overhauled 6 months ago. Full digital lockout, internal-only servers, non-cloud-based. These cameras, this feed, didn't come from inside our network. They wired around it, Margaret said grimly. Someone installed a parallel system. Amara turned to her. Can they hear us right now? Margaret pointed to a signal reader in her hand. Not from here. This room's a dead zone now. But whoever's running this, she gestured at the servers. They've been watching long enough to know everything. Charles stared at a monitor that showed his son's bedroom. Empty, peaceful, vulnerable. How long do we estimate this operation's been running? He asked, voice low. Margaret glanced at a timestamp in the bottom corner of a feed. This one's dated 6 weeks ago, but some go further back. Months, maybe more. Charles's hands clenched. And we didn't know. We didn't look, Amara said, voice sharper than she intended. Charles met her eyes. She didn't flinch. No, he agreed. We didn't. An hour later, Margaret's tech team arrived. Charles and Amara waited inside the chopper. The rotors silent. Parked on a clearing of frostbitten gravel, a thick blanket of clouds rolled overhead, ready to split open with snow. Amara sat in the co-pilot seat, hands wrapped around a steaming thermos the guards had passed her. She hadn't spoken in several minutes. Charles leaned over. Talk to me. She stared ahead. They were watching me before the board meeting. He didn't deny it. Amara shook her head. This isn't about you anymore. Charles exhaled slowly. No. It isn't. She turned toward him. So who are they really watching? Charles looked out the windshield, the silence speaking louder than any answer. My son, he said at last. And you. Amara's stomach twisted. Why? Why? Charles hesitated. Because you're an anomaly. You weren't supposed to get close. You weren't supposed to see what you saw. And now, you've become the unpredictable variable in their plan. Then they're making a mistake, she said. He looked at her again. Why? Because I'm not the one who gets watched, she said quietly. I'm the one who watches back. Back at the estate, the mood had shifted entirely. Guards were posted at every entrance. Interior staff were being vetted again. Interviews, background checks, surveillance reviews. Charles ordered a full sweep of the East Wing, the servant quarters, the garage. Amara didn't return to her old room. Charles gave her a secure suite near his own, closer to the estate's core. It was more space than she knew what to do with. But she didn't argue. That night, Amara sat by the fireplace in her new quarters. A soft hum of jazz playing low on the turntable someone had kindly left on. Her body ached, her mind churned. She stared at the wall for a long time, until a knock broke her thoughts. It was Charles. Got a moment? He asked. She nodded, motioning him in. He didn't sit. Just stood near the mantel, hands in his pockets. I can't trust anyone right now, he said. My COO is panicking. My board is fracturing. And Margaret thinks the surveillance system was funded internally. Amara frowned. You think it's a board member? No, he said. I think it's worse than that. He handed her a folder, thin, plain. She opened it. Inside were photos of Victor. Not just from the estate, but from 2 years prior, smiling beside a different employer. A politician. One who had died under strange circumstances. Victor was placed, Charles said. He's been a plant before. He was never just a driver. And I think whoever put him there is playing a long game. Amara's voice dropped. To do what? To own me. Charles walked to the window, looking out into the frozen garden below. I've spent my life building things. Companies, alliances, influence. But somewhere along the way, I forgot that building something doesn't protect it. Only watching does. He turned back to her. You saw what I didn't. That makes you dangerous to them. Amara closed the folder. And what does it make me to you? Charles studied her. The only person I trust right now. A long silence. Then he added, there's a gala in 2 nights. Big charity event. Political faces, media, people I can't avoid. And someone in that room will know something. I want you there. Amara blinked. Me? In a dress? Smiling and nodding at billionaires? Charles smiled faintly. Not smiling. Watching. Listening. She hesitated. I'll arrange everything, he said. She gave a small sigh. Then I guess I better learn how to walk in heels again. Charles turned to leave, but paused at the door. Amara? Yeah? You don't need armor to be powerful. You just need truth. And then he was gone. Alone again, Amara looked at the folder in her lap. They had watched her. Now, she would return the favor. The city shimmered beneath a veil of winter fog as the limousine pulled up to the Plaza Hotel's grand entrance. Paparazzi clustered in tight packs, flashing bulbs exploding like fireworks, as polished guests in silk and satin stepped onto the red carpet. It was the kind of gala where everyone smiled too widely, drank too much, and pretended to care about causes they couldn't spell. Amara had never felt more out of place. She sat still for a moment, heart thudding under the elegant black velvet dress chosen by Margaret's assistant, a floor-length sheath that hugged her like it had been sewn onto her bones. Her hair, swept back into soft curls, framed her face with the kind of poise that didn't belong to housemaids. But tonight, she wasn't the help. She was the observer, the variable. Charles stepped in beside her, dressed in a classic midnight tuxedo that somehow made him look even more commanding. The lines on his face seemed sharper under the lights. His eyes held the calm of someone walking into enemy territory and knowing it. "You good?" he asked. Amara gave a breathless smile. "You ever feel like you're walking into a room full of people who've already decided you don't belong?" Charles gave her a sideways glance. "Every day since I turned 21 and inherited a billion-dollar business built by men who never expected me to survive." Amara nodded once. "Then I guess I'm in good company." He offered his arm. She took it. They stepped out into the lights. The ballroom was an ocean of wealth. Crystal chandeliers, live string quartet, laughter echoing off marble columns. Waiters in white gloves floated past with trays of caviar and champagne, and every conversation buzzed with rehearsed charm. Amara stayed close to Charles at first, scanning each cluster of guests like a security camera in a dress. Every smile was a mask, every handshake a negotiation. She watched the way eyes flicked, the subtle shifts in posture, the way one man kept adjusting his cufflinks each time Charles spoke. "There's a rhythm to this," she murmured. Charles sipped his scotch. "And what's the beat?" "Paranoia dressed as power." He smiled into his glass. "Told you were good at this." They made their way through a series of handshakes and small talk. Charles introduced her as an advisor on internal systems, which prompted vague nods and polite curiosity. Few people pressed further. Most assumed she was just another consultant being paid well to look important, until they met Julian Carr, mid-50s. Salt and pepper hair. CEO of a pharmaceutical giant. Harvard smile. Eyes too calculating to be casual. He clasped Charles's hand and gave Amara a slow, deliberate once-over. "This must be your new project," he said, the edge of a smirk playing on his lips. "Amara Knight," she replied before Charles could speak. "Systems integrity, threat analysis." Julian raised an impressed brow. Well. You've got a sharp one, Charles." "She's sharper than most of us," Charles said. Julian's smile faltered just a fraction. Amara clocked it. He turned back to her. "Do you always accompany your employer to charity events, Miss Knight?" "Only the ones with security gaps and political money," she said, smiling sweetly. Julian's expression stiffened. Charles let out a small laugh. "We should mingle." As they walked away, Amara leaned closer. "That man's hiding something." "I know," Charles said. "He's on my shortlist." Tector Felmanta. "Shortlist for what?" "For being the one behind the surveillance." Amara's steps slowed. "You think it's him?" "I think he's not clean," Charles said. "And I think he's testing me." A waiter passed. Charles took a glass of bourbon. Amara declined. Then she spotted him. Across the room, half-shadowed under an archway, speaking with a woman in red, stood a man she hadn't seen since the boardroom incident. Gerald Klein. He was back. Amara's pulse jumped. "Gerald's here." Charles turned sharply. "Where?" She nodded subtly. "By the third pillar. Talking to a woman with auburn hair." Charles didn't move. "He's not supposed to be within 100 yards of me. Legal order. Breach of contract." Amara's eyes narrowed. "Then he's not here to be seen." She watched the woman he was with. The body language was stiff. Gerald kept glancing away, toward the crowd. The woman, however, kept nodding, her hand tightening around her clutch. "She's handing him something," Amara murmured. "Stay close," Charles said. "We're going to interrupt." They crossed the ballroom slowly. deliberately, weaving through couples and groups like predators in a social jungle. But before they reached Gerald, he caught sight of them and bolted. "Damn it," Charles hissed. Amara didn't think. She took off after him, heels forgotten, weaving through the exit arch just as Gerald disappeared down the rear corridor behind the kitchen. She caught the tail of his jacket as he turned a corner, nearly crashing into a waiter. "Gerald!" she shouted. He didn't stop. Charles was behind her now. So was a security officer from the hotel. They reached a stairwell just in time to see Gerald push through a side door leading to the loading dock. Charles paused. "Don't follow. He might not be alone." Amara slowed, panting slightly. He looked scared. Charles frowned. "That's new. AT2. The security officer moved past them, radioing ahead. Charles pulled Amara back into the shadows. "I need to know who he was talking to," he said. "That woman. Did you get a picture?" "No, but I remember her face." "Then tomorrow, you describe it to Margaret. Every detail." Amara nodded, pulse still racing. Charles touched her arm. "You did well." Her hand trembled slightly. "I chased a billionaire through a gala," she said with a tight smile. "That's not exactly in the housekeeping handbook." Charles smiled. "We'll rewrite the handbook." Behind them, the gala continued, oblivious. But in the quiet stairwell, Amara knew the rules had changed again. No longer were they hunting shadows. Now, the shadows were running. The morning after the gala, the estate's atmosphere was taut with anticipation. Sunlight poured through the tall windows like theater spotlights. But even the warmth of daybreak couldn't chase away the unease curling in the corners of every room. Guards spoke in low tones. Margaret was already shut away in the tech lab, compiling facial composites from Amara's descriptions. Charles hadn't come down for breakfast. Amara stood in the study alone, tracing the edge of a family photo on the mantel. Charles, a younger version of him with kinder eyes, his wife Elena radiant and laughing. Their son nestled in her arms, a moment in time no longer possible. She turned when the door opened behind her. It was Charles. Still in yesterday's suit, the tie missing, his eyes tired but clear. "She's someone," Amara said before he could speak. "The woman from last night. I didn't get her name, but she wasn't a guest. This going that." Charles gave a small nod. Margaret ran her image through facial recognition. "Her name is Vanessa Sloan, former lobbyist, disgraced after a pharmaceutical bribery case 5 years ago. Who paid her to be there? We don't know yet," Charles replied. "But we found something better." He handed Amara a phone. On the screen was a paused security feed from the loading dock exit, Gerald talking on a burner phone seconds before disappearing from view. Charles pressed play. The audio was muffled, but Gerald's voice came through just enough. "No, he's getting too close. I can't keep this up." "She saw me." "The maid, Amara." "Yes, I'm sure. She's not just a maid anymore." Then silence. Amara exhaled slowly. "So, it's real." Charles met her gaze. "It's always been real. We just didn't have a name for it." He stepped to the desk, retrieved a folder, and opened it. Inside were files, photos, spreadsheets, years of compiled information. "We've been watching a man named Elias Kane," Charles said. "Billionaire. Old money. Not loud like me. He funds in silence, invests in shadows. Kane has no social media, no public scandals, no interviews, but he controls 2 shell companies that hold stock in my firm." Amara's brow furrowed. "Why hasn't he been stopped?" "Because no one's had the guts to touch him," Charles said. "Until now." He flipped a page and pointed. "That woman last night, Vanessa Sloan, she worked for Kane's biotech arm before her fall. The same arm that's been trying to push a buyout through our board." "And Victor?" Amara asked. "Placed by Kane, same training protocol. We think Victor was meant to destabilize me, get close to my son, manipulate the household, create just enough chaos to distract me while Kane maneuvered from inside the company." Amara sat down slowly. "So, Gerald, Victor, Vanessa, all pawns." Charles nodded. "And Kane's the hand that moves them." Later that afternoon, Margaret stormed into the room with a tablet in hand. "I got something," she said. Charles and Amara followed her to the operations room, where monitors displayed cross-linked data streams. 2 nights ago, just after Victor ran, someone accessed a private server from an offshore IP. They downloaded encrypted legal documents, company memos, internal emails, including one thread where you, Charles, discussed pushing back the board vote. Charles frowned. That email wasn't saved externally. Exactly, Margaret said, which means someone on the inside gave Kane live access. She pulled up another file, a memo. Authorization code stamped with a name at the bottom. Amara leaned in. Her mouth went dry. Ron Mitchell, she whispered. Margaret shook her head. Not quite. Look at the digital signature, it's been forged. The real source used Ron's credentials as a mask. Charles was quiet for a long moment. So we're back where we started, Amara said. Not quite, Margaret replied. The signal was traced to an old server node Kane used back in 2018 for a biotech acquisition. Guess what's located next to that server hub? Charles tilted his head. Don't tell me. Margaret smiled grimly. An abandoned law office owned by one of Kane's oldest subsidiaries, ID. She turned to Charles. He's hiding in plain sight. Charles took a deep breath. Then it's time to stop watching. That evening, Amara found herself seated in a small, dark SUV beside Charles and Margaret. The vehicle cruised through midtown Manhattan with purpose. The city's usual hum muffled by layers of armored glass. The air was tight with expectation. We have one shot, Margaret said. He's holding a private meeting at that location. Off books. No cameras. Just his inner circle. Ivry said. Charles looked at Amara. You still sure about this? She nodded. If I run now, I'll spend the rest of my life wondering who's watching from the dark. They arrived at the nondescript building, no signage, no security guards visible, just a gray steel door and the quiet hum of power behind stone walls. Inside, the halls smelled of dust and old contracts. Amara's heels clicked softly against the marble floor as they ascended 2 flights, then paused. Margaret handed Charles a wire. We record. We don't provoke. If we find him alone, you talk. If he has muscle, we adapt. Charles adjusted his collar, then pushed the door open. There, seated behind a heavy oak desk, was Elias Kane. He looked ordinary. Slicked gray hair, a tailored navy suit, calm hands folded atop a file of papers, no security in sight. I expected you earlier, Kane said, voice smooth as glass. Charles stepped forward. You've been trespassing in my life. No, Kane replied. I've been pruning your weaknesses, and you made it so easy. Sentimentalism, broken security. A maid who thinks she's a detective. Amara stiffened. Kane's eyes flicked to her. You're the disruption. She's the reckoning, Charles said flatly. Kane smiled. I could ruin you both with a phone call. Amara stepped closer. And we could expose every system you've corrupted, every life you've touched with your lies. Kane laughed softly. You think justice lives in a file folder? No, she said, stepping even closer, voice steady. It lives in people like me, people who've been watched their whole lives, and are finally watching back. Kane's expression faltered. Just a second. But it was enough. Charles laid a USB drive on the table. Everything you've done. Recorded. Copied. Distributed to 3 media outlets and a federal task force. This meeting is the formality. Kane's hand twitched. You won't make it stick, he said. Amara smiled. Then I'll make it loud. The moment Charles and Amara stepped out of the building, the air felt different, charged, brittle. Snow had begun to fall, silent and steady, settling onto the hoods of black cars parked along the curb like a shroud. The streets were quiet, too quiet for Manhattan, as if the city itself had paused to listen. Amara didn't speak. Neither did Charles. Their breath rose in puffs of steam as they walked to the waiting SUV where Margaret was already inside, tablet glowing with live feeds. Well? She asked, the second the door shut. He blinked, Charles said. Didn't panic. But the cracks showed. He knows he's been cornered, Amara added. He also knows he's still protected for now. Margaret swiped through screens. I pushed the packet to the New York Times, Washington Post. and a small federal oversight task force that still has a spine. They've all confirmed receipt. The countdown's begun. How long before he tries to counter? Amara asked. Depends, Margaret said. But I'd wager by sunrise, we'll have either a lawsuit, a slander campaign, or a mysterious IRS audit knocking at your door. Charles grunted. Let him come. Back at the estate, everything seemed too calm. The household staff had been given the weekend off, replaced by private security and internal contractors loyal to Charles. Even the chef was a vetted specialist. It wasn't paranoia anymore. It was procedure. Amara stood in the kitchen, staring into her untouched tea. The adrenaline from facing Kane had worn off, and in its place was a creeping uncertainty. The man had looked her in the eye and dismissed her like dust, yet something about his reaction told her he didn't expect to lose, and people like him didn't bet unless they were holding something back. Daniel entered, carrying a folder. Thought you'd want this. She took it, flipping through the contents. It was everything they had on Kane: photos, assets, hidden subsidiaries. But at the bottom was a sealed envelope marked only with her name. Amara paused. What's this? Daniel shrugged. Came in anonymously, postmarked this morning. No prints, no digital trail. But it passed our scans, no toxins, no trackers. I have to do. She tore it open. Inside was a single photograph, grainy, zoomed, but clear enough. It was her, taken from a high vantage point, perhaps a rooftop. She was leaving her old apartment, just weeks before she ever met Charles. In the corner of the image, blurred but recognizable, was her younger brother, Marcus. Her breath hitched. There was writing on the back, in looping cursive. Everything has a cost, even truth. We got in my now. She dropped into the nearest chair, the photograph clutched in shaking fingers. Charles entered moments later, sensing something was wrong before she said a word. She handed him the photo. He stared at it for a long time. They're moving into the personal, he said. That means we hit a nerve. Amara looked up. My brother hasn't been involved in anything. He's clean. He's a teacher in Baltimore. They're trying to scare me. Charles nodded. It's working. She frowned. You want me to back off? I want you to know what we're up against. People like Kane don't fight fair. They don't wait for subpoenas. They break you first, then bury the pieces in red tape. Amara stood slowly. Then let's not give him the satisfaction. The following morning, the first article dropped. Exclusive. Billionaire Elias Kane linked to covert surveillance and shell companies tied to corporate espionage. The headline splashed across every screen. Cable news cut from political debates to late-night panels dissecting leaked documents. Kane's face, once rarely seen in public, now plastered every screen in America. Charles turned on the news as the estate's media room flickered to life. The Times is leading with it. Margaret's leak worked. Amara sat on the edge of the leather sofa, watching with narrowed eyes. They're spinning hard, she said. A panelist read from Kane's official response. A coordinated smear campaign led by a disgruntled former partner and falsified documents. Classic play, Charles said. Deny, discredit, delay. But it won't stick forever, Amara said. Especially not if we follow up. Margaret appeared in the doorway. Then, you'll love this. She held up a USB drive. Intercepted communication from one of Kane's digital proxies. He's moving funds from his Cayman accounts into a new shell organization registered under a false name. Guess who signed the documents? Charles leaned forward. Gerald? No, Margaret said. Vanessa Sloan. Amara sat up straighter. She's back in play. Margaret nodded. And we tracked her to a hotel in New Jersey. Registered under an alias. But facial rec flagged her check-in. Is she the link? Amara asked. She's more than that, Margaret said. She's the insurance policy. If Kane goes down, she either disappears with the money or burns everything to the ground. Charles was already dialing. We need to bring her in. Amara stood. No. Let me. He paused. Alone? She remembers me. She might let her guard down, and I want her to look in the face of the woman she underestimated. Charles hesitated, then nodded. Take Daniel and 2 shadows. No risks. I going. 2 hours later. Amara stepped into the lobby of the Monarch Hotel, a mid-tier property dressed like it wanted to be upscale. She wore a trench coat, sunglasses, and calm like armor. Vanessa Sloane was in the hotel bar, sipping something amber and reading the Financial Times. Amara approached slowly. "Funny," she said, sliding into the seat across from her. "You don't seem like someone on the run." Vanessa looked up and smirked. "And you don't seem like someone who knows what she's doing." "Artie, I know exactly what I'm doing," Amara said. "And I know exactly who you're doing it for." Vanessa sighed, folding her paper. "Kane always said you were a threat. I didn't see it then. I do now. You should have listened sooner," Amara replied. Vanessa leaned forward. "Do you really think truth wins? That a few headlines can stop a man like Kane?" "No," Amara said. "But exposure forces him into the light. And men like him rot in sunlight." Vanessa chuckled. "Good line. Even tell too." She reached into her purse. Daniel stepped forward from behind a pillar, gun holstered but ready. "No sudden moves," he warned. Vanessa froze, then slowly pulled out a USB drive. "This is everything," she said. "Insurance, in case Kane turned on me." "Why give it to me?" Amara asked. "Because you're already dead in his book," Vanessa said. "And dead people make bold choices." The drive back to the estate was silent. Amara held the USB tightly in her palm, the cold metal biting into her skin like a reminder. This was real. Vanessa's words replayed in her mind. "You're already dead in his book." She wasn't sure if it was a warning, a threat, or a twisted form of respect. Either way, it left a chill deeper than the December air. When she and Daniel arrived, the estate was buzzing. Charles was in the security suite with Margaret and 2 federal agents, who had shown up unannounced earlier that morning. Amara walked straight to the conference table and dropped the USB beside Charles. She gave it up. Charles looked at her just for a beat, something unreadable in his eyes, and picked it up. "You okay?" he asked. "No," Amara said. "But I'm here." He nodded. That was enough for now. Margaret plugged in the drive. The screen lit up with folders, encrypted documents, transaction trails, offshore accounts, audio clips, names, dates. Enough digital evidence to bury Kane 10 times over. One folder stood out, labeled Whitmore Internal. Margaret opened it. What they found made the air thicken. Surveillance logs, detailed reports, conversations transcribed, Charles's private calls, Amara's medical files, even the results of a background investigation on her brother, Marcus. Then came a series of flagged files titled Operation Mirror. Margaret clicked. Inside were briefings on a proposed coup and internal restructuring of Whitmore Holdings. The goal: force Charles to resign, place a controllable board member at the top, and use the company's clean public image as a cover for laundering money through health tech ventures. But the worst part wasn't the plan. It was the timeline. It started 2 years ago, before Amara had ever been hired, before Charles had lost his wife, before anyone suspected a thing. They hadn't been reacting to threats. They had always been the target. "They knew I would break eventually," Charles said later that night, standing by the fireplace in his office. The flames cast dancing shadows across the lined weariness of his face. They didn't know how, but they knew grief changes people. Amara sat in the armchair across from him, still in her trench coat, her fingers wrapped around a mug of untouched tea. "They didn't expect me," she said softly. "No," Charles agreed. "You weren't in their projections. You weren't part of the algorithm. You weren't vetted. You just showed up." He turned toward her. "And they couldn't control you." Amara finally sipped the tea, letting the warmth anchor her. "I never thought my life would amount to more than keeping a baby safe, folding sheets, and praying I got paid on time." Charles shook his head. "You're not the help, Amara. You're the hinge." She looked at him, puzzled. He smiled faintly. "The door doesn't swing unless something strong holds it in place." Two, with a reason for cated. By morning, the fallout began. News anchors were no longer speculating, they were reporting. The contents of Vanessa's drive had been carefully released through secure channels, and media outlets pounced. Kane was linked to at least 4 fake foundations, 2 international shell corps, and a network of consultants who had worked to destabilize board structures across multiple industries. FBI investigations were officially opened, congressional hearings were proposed, and still Kane hadn't responded publicly. But Amara knew better. The silence was strategic, and it wouldn't last. Margaret walked into the kitchen holding a fresh report. "We've got a new problem." Amara looked up from her toast. "What now?" "3 separate digital footprints are trying to trace our server relays. Not amateurs, government-level skill sets. My bet? Kane's bought friends in high places." Charles entered the room just as she finished. "Then we need to go on offense." Amara raised a brow. "We just broke the story of the decade." "That wasn't offense," Charles said. "That was exposure. Offense is what happens next." Margaret handed him a folder. "There's a secondary shell company, Elbridge Technologies, still untouched by the feds. It holds patents that could revolutionize diagnostic medicine. Kane was funneling stolen Whitmore R&D into it. If we reclaim that company before the feds freeze it, we cut off his future revenue pipeline." Amara leaned forward. "How do we do that?" "We buy it," Charles said. "Quietly, through proxies, use the same tactic he used against us. And when he finds out?" Charles's voice darkened. "Let him. He'll know what it feels like to lose something you built." That evening, Amara visited Charles's son, Eli, in the East Wing. The boy was building a puzzle, hundreds of pieces spread across the floor. He looked up and smiled shyly when she entered. "I saved you the sky," he said, pointing to a pile of blue pieces. Amara laughed and sat beside him, her knees aching just slightly on the soft rug. "You always save me the hard parts," he shrugged. "You're good at finishing things." For a few minutes, the chaos of the world melted away. Just cardboard pieces, quiet giggles, and a boy's quiet brilliance. But then Eli looked up, his eyes more serious. "Is the bad man gone?" Amara paused. "Not yet," she said honestly. "But we're close." Eli nodded, thoughtful. "You're not like the other grown-ups. You don't pretend," she smiled. "Pretending doesn't make monsters go away." "No," he agreed. "But people like you do." Amara's throat tightened. She didn't know what kind of woman she was before she walked into this estate. But now she was the kind who finished what others were too afraid to start. The boardroom was quiet, eerily so. The long mahogany table gleamed beneath overhead lighting, casting reflections of the 10 directors seated in rigid postures, each one visibly rattled by the morning's headlines. Outside the tall windows, the city glistened under a coat of snow, cold and detached from the storm brewing within these walls. Charles sat at the head of the table, flanked by Amara on one side and Margaret on the other. The USB drive Vanessa had handed over sat between them like a live grenade. Its contents had already gone viral. Whitmore Holdings was now synonymous with corporate betrayal in public discourse. "This emergency session," Charles began, voice low but razor sharp, "is not about my reputation. It's about the survival of this company. Elias Kane tried to hollow us out from the inside." A skeptical board member spoke. "You say that like it's over. What if he retaliates? What if he sues? This kind of war, it's not clean." Amara leaned forward. "It already wasn't clean. You just didn't know." Another member frowned. "With all due respect, Miss Knight." "No," Charles cut in. "She speaks for me, and she's earned the right." Silence. Margaret pressed a button, activating the screen behind Charles. A live feed security cam came up, Vanessa Sloan sitting in a holding room, under armed protection. Next to it, screenshots of Kane's false documents, offshore accounts, and the shell companies designed to collapse Whitmore from the inside out. "These aren't theories," Charles said. "They're facts. This board was compromised. Gerald Klein was one of the tools used to engineer my ousting. He wasn't acting alone. You were all being watched. Manipulated." No one spoke. Then Charles stood. "I won't step down. I won't apologize for uncovering a threat. What I will do is ask for your cooperation for this company to become the fortress it once pretended to be, clean, transparent, ruthless in its protection of those it serves. If you can't align with that, walk now." No one moved. That was answer enough. Later, in the estate's greenhouse, Amara stood among the winter citrus trees. The faint scent of lemon and cold earth mingled with the tension in her chest. She had wanted justice but hadn't anticipated how hollow the victories could feel. Charles entered without a word, hands in his coat pockets. "The board didn't blink," he said. "That surprised me." Amara didn't turn. "They weren't loyal to you. They were loyal to the illusion of safety. Kane cracked that illusion. Now they're scared of being next." Charles came closer. "That doesn't bother you?" "What bothers me," she said, finally turning to face him, "is that we still don't know what his endgame is. This wasn't just about you, or the company. There's something else." He nodded slowly. "We're missing a piece." Margaret appeared in the doorway just then, breathless. "We have it." Both turned. She held out a file. "This wasn't in the original batch," Margaret said, "but it was hidden in one of Vanessa's encrypted folders. Looks like a ledger payments made to anonymous accounts tied to medical facilities." Charles frowned. "Hospitals?" "No," Margaret said. "Psychiatric institutions." Amara's eyes narrowed. "Where?" Margaret's voice dropped. "One in particular. Street Halloran's in upstate New York." Charles's face paled. "That's where Elena was committed, in the final months." Amara's breath caught. "Your wife?" Charles nodded. She checked herself in. "I wasn't even notified until a week later." Margaret laid the file open on the greenhouse bench. "There's more. Kane's biotech division funded a research grant there, one that never got published. But the staff were quietly rotated out afterward. New leadership. And one of the doctors listed in the ledger was also consulting for Elbridge Technologies." Amara's heart pounded. "They experimented on her?" Margaret hesitated. "I don't know. But the dates match. And there's evidence they accessed Elena's patient files, months after her death." Charles sat down heavily, staring at nothing. "They used my wife," he said softly. "As a test case. As leverage." Amara moved beside him. "We don't have to let it end there." He looked at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, his eyes were glassy with unshed grief. "No," he said. "We don't." That night, Amara returned to her suite and locked the door. She needed space. She needed clarity. But instead, she found a package on her bed. No return address, no markings. She opened it carefully. Inside was a single object, a tie. The same brand, the same silk pattern that Victor had worn the morning he tried to kill Charles. Pinned to it was a note. "You saved him once. You won't get another chance." Amara stood frozen, the air around her thick with fear and fury. They were watching again, but this time, she wasn't unprepared. She picked up the tie, her hands calm, and folded it into her coat pocket. Then she opened her drawer and reached for the small handgun Charles had given her after the confrontation with Victor. This time, they wouldn't find her helpless. She didn't wait for trouble anymore. She walked into it. It was just past midnight when Amara stepped into the surveillance hub, the soft hum of servers punctuating the silence like a ticking bomb. Margaret was already there, cross-referencing recent IP logs with incoming pings from unsecured relay networks. The faint glow of a dozen monitors reflected off her glasses. "I take it you got the package," she said without turning around. Amara dropped the tie onto the desk. Same signature, same tactic, threat wrapped in nostalgia. Margaret finally looked at her. "They want you off balance." Amara pulled up a chair, eyes fierce. "Then it's time we unbalance them. Well, this day." She held up her phone. "I'm going back to Street Halloran's." Margaret's brows shot up. "Alone?" "No," Amara said. "But I need to be the one walking through the front door. If Elena's files are there, I need to see them with my own eyes. I need to know what they did to her." Margaret studied her for a moment. "This could be a trap. I'm counting on it," Amara said. The next morning, Amara and Charles sat side by side in the SUV as they passed the iron gate of Street Halloran's Psychiatric Institute. The facility loomed against the gray sky, tall and clinical, its walls thick with silence and secrets. "Last time I came here, Elena wouldn't even speak," Charles said quietly. "She just stared at the snow falling outside her window." Amara looked at him. "Was she afraid?" "She was exhausted," Charles replied. "Like she was fighting something invisible. I thought it was grief. Now I wonder if it was something far worse. Ray batted. Rebue's example. They stepped out of the vehicle, flanked by Daniel and a plainclothes federal agent. Inside, the front desk nurse barely looked up as Amara signed the visitor log under a false name, Dr. Vivian Lowell. The air was sterile, the kind that masked more than germs. Amara and Charles were escorted to the records wing, where an older administrator waited with forced politeness. Her badge read Dr. Isa Warren. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, standing. "Your request for your late wife's medical file was unexpected. So were the payments from Elias Kane," Amara said bluntly. Dr. Warren blinked. "I'm not sure I understand." Amara opened her coat, revealing the lapel mic she'd carefully clipped to her sweater. "Then this conversation is going to be very helpful for both of us." Charles stepped forward, voice low and commanding. "We're not here to shame anyone. We're here to uncover the truth." Dr. Warren hesitated, then motioned toward a back office. She closed the door softly behind them. "She was part of a trial," Warren said. "But not voluntarily. Kane's biotech subsidiary sponsored it. They promised cutting-edge treatment for high-functioning patients. What they actually did was monitor neural responses under psychological stress, memory manipulation, auditory patterning, induced trauma loops." Amara's voice shook. "You tortured her." "No," Warren said. "They did." B growled. She opened a file drawer and retrieved a thick envelope. "These were the copies I kept. I knew someday someone would come asking. I just didn't think it would be his widow's maid." Amara didn't flinch. Neither did he. In the SUV, Amara opened the file. Photographs, brain scans, audio logs. One transcript caught her attention. Elena's voice, faint, barely above a whisper, was recorded repeating the same phrase. "It's not my grief. It's his. I.S." Charles's hands clenched on the steering wheel. "She took the fall for me," he said. "She thought if she absorbed the weight of my failures, I'd survive it." Amara looked at him. "She didn't fail you. You were both targeted." Charles nodded, eyes misty. "And now it's my turn to return the favor." He picked up his phone and made a call. "Margaret, I want Kane's full legal vulnerability report. We go public tonight." Amara's head snapped up. "Are you sure?" Charles met her gaze. "If I don't do it now, I never will. And the people who trusted me, Elena, you, even Eli, they'll never be safe." Back at the estate, preparations moved quickly. Margaret compiled a full exposé. Kane's manipulation of medical research, surveillance of grieving families, laundering stolen data through biotech acquisitions. Every document Amara and Charles had gathered, every transcript, every leaked file packaged into one unflinching video report. Amara voiced the introduction. "I was the maid, the housekeeper, the nobody. That's why they didn't see me coming. But I saw them. I watched them destroy a woman's mind, poison a child's future, and try to unravel a man who had already lost everything. This is the truth. It's not clean, it's not easy, but it's real." Margaret hit publish, and the world lit up. Within hours, the video was trending. Former patients from Street Halloran's came forward. Lawmakers called for hearings. International watchdogs launched investigations into Kane's biotech ventures. Then came the call. It was Margaret who picked it up. "It's him," she mouthed to Charles and Amara. She hit speaker. Kane's voice, smooth as always, filled the room. "You've declared war. I hope you've read enough history to know how those usually end." Charles didn't blink. "We're rewriting the ending." Kane laughed. "You think exposure will stop me?" "No," Amara said, stepping forward. "But people are watching now. And you can't kill us all." A pause. Then Kane's voice turned sharp. "Then I'll start with your brother." The line went dead. Amara stood frozen. Charles didn't hesitate. "Margaret, lock down the estate." "Daniel, I want 2 teams in Baltimore by nightfall." Amara's voice, hoarse with fury. "He won't touch Marcus." Charles nodded. "No, because this time, we strike first." "Okay." Amara barely waited for the SUV door to swing open before sprinting into the apartment complex. The air in Baltimore was wet and heavy, carrying the sharp sting of cold rain, but she didn't notice. Her brother's building loomed ahead, modest, red-bricked, 3 stories high, with a narrow stairwell Amara had climbed 100 times as a teenager. This time, she wasn't here to visit. She was here to save a life. Charles's private security team had already swept the perimeter. Margaret was tracking phone pings and digital movement. Daniel followed close behind, a Glock holstered under his coat. As Amara reached the second floor, her chest tightened. The door to Marcus's apartment was ajar. She didn't knock. She pushed it open. "Marcus," she called out, voice sharp, urgent. From the kitchen, her brother appeared confused, barefoot, holding a bowl of cereal. "Amara? What the hell?" She crossed the room in seconds and threw her arms around him. Hey, you okay?" he asked, the bowl nearly tipping. "I'm fine," she whispered, gripping him tighter. "But you're not safe here." Marcus pulled back, eyes narrowing. "What's going on?" Daniel entered behind her. "Sir, we need to move, now." Marcus blinked. "Move? Who are you?" Amara stepped between them. "I'll explain everything. But please pack a bag. Just the essentials. We'll be safer back at the estate." 30 minutes later, the black SUV pulled away from the curb. Inside, Marcus sat between Amara and Daniel, fidgeting. "Okay," he said. "I know you've always had some kind of double life going on, but this, armed guards, black cars, secret missions, this is new." Amara sighed. "You remember when I got that job with the Whitmores?" "Yeah. You said it was just housekeeping." She nodded. "It started that way. Then I saw something I wasn't supposed to. And then I stayed. I fought. For what? For the truth," she said. "For people like us. For people who never get to be more than background noise." Marcus looked at her. Really looked. "You're not just fighting, are you? You're leading." Amara stared out the window, rain streaking the glass like claw marks. "Not by choice. But if I stop now, people get hurt." Back at the estate, Charles and Margaret were in full tactical mode. The mansion had transformed into a war room, whiteboards filled with maps, encrypted laptops on every surface, operatives in and out of every hallway. "Where are we on Kane's movements?" Charles asked. Margaret pointed to a glowing map. "His private jet left Teterboro last night. Destination masked, but triangulated via flight patterns. He's in Bermuda. Too far to grab him," Charles muttered. "Not necessarily," Margaret said. "Interpol issued a watch notice this morning, and our media leak stirred up international attention. He won't stay untouchable for long." Charles turned to Amara as she entered with Marcus. "Is he safe?" Amara nodded. "He's under. But Kane knows he's my blood. It's only a matter of time before he tries again." Charles's voice lowered. "Then we draw him in." That night, Amara stood on the west balcony, watching the rain taper off into a soft drizzle. Below her, the estate's grounds glowed with motion sensor lights. She could see her brother's silhouette through the guest wing window, pacing restlessly. Charles joined her. "He reminds me of you," he said. "Stubborn?" she asked. He chuckled. "Unbreakable." They stood in silence for a moment. "I got word an hour ago," Charles said. "A wire transfer left one of Kane's known accounts. Large sum, traced to an offshore fund that's connected to a group of hired contractors." Amara turned to him. "A hit? We believe so. But we don't know the target yet." Amara's stomach sank. "It could be Marcus," she said. "Or Eli. Or even you. Which is why we're going to flip the script." "ID Johns." Charles handed her a folder. Inside was a false itinerary. An announcement that Charles Whitmore would be appearing at a charity gala in New York the following night. The gala didn't exist, but the press release would be real. "We leak it," Kane bites, "and we prepare for him to send someone." Amara studied the plan. "You're using yourself as bait." "No," he said. "We're using a ghost of me. I won't be anywhere near that building." Amara nodded slowly. "Then who's our blade?" "You," he said. "You and Margaret will be in the control room. Daniel will be in the field. The second Kane's team shows up, we tag them, follow them, and trace the line back to the last piece of his infrastructure. And then?" Charles's voice hardened. "We cut it down." The next morning, headlines buzzed with news of Charles Whitmore's appearance at the Green City Benefit Gala, a fictional event created down to the venue, guest list, and fundraising goals. Margaret even mocked up a fake website. Within hours, chatter started. Dark web forums lit up with anonymous queries. The same burner accounts tied to Kane's contractors showed signs of digital activity. They were biting. By nightfall, a black van was seen circling the fake gala location. Margaret monitored it in real time. "They're doing recon," she said. 2 men, armed, disguised as caterers. Daniel's voice crackled over the comms. "Copy that. Visual on both. Holding position." Aye. Inside the surveillance van, Amara watched the screens. Her jaw was clenched. Her voice, steady. "Let them get closer. Let them think they've won." One of the men stepped into the side entrance of the venue, rigged with security cameras, facial recognition tech, and a dozen plainclothes operatives posing as staff. Seconds later, Margaret's screen flashed red. "Got him," she said. "Victor, Kane's personal cleaner." Amara froze. "He survived?" Margaret nodded grimly. "Looks like Kane patched him up and sent him back in." "Then this time," Amara said, reaching for her earpiece, "we finish it." Victor moved like a ghost, swift, precise, terrifying in his silence. He had changed since the last time Amara saw him. The scar along his jaw was new, deep and fresh, like a war medal earned in hell. Dressed in a caterer's uniform, he moved through the back corridors of the faux gala venue, unaware that every step he took was tracked, measured, and mirrored on a screen miles away. In the surveillance van parked a block away, Amara's eyes didn't blink. "That's him," she said. "Same gait, same left-hand twitch when he's nervous." Margaret zoomed in. "He's not carrying a firearm." "Incline. Doesn't mean he isn't dangerous," Daniel added from his position inside the venue, disguised as a security supervisor. Victor reached the hallway just off the main ballroom, a room dressed up for a party that would never happen. Faux decorations, faux guest list. Even the ice sculpture was fake. He stopped, looked up, paused. Amara leaned forward. "He knows," she said. Victor pulled a small object from his pocket, an earpiece, and inserted it. Then, slowly, he spoke aloud. "I know this is a trap, but Kane said to walk in anyway." In the van, Amara's blood ran cold. "He's broadcasting on purpose," Margaret said, adjusting the audio levels. "He's not here to win." Amara sat back, eyes wide. "He's here to say something." Margaret gave her a sideways glance. "Then we listen." Inside the ballroom, Victor moved to the center of the empty dance floor, standing beneath a glittering chandelier that never had a purpose beyond illusion. He looked up right into the nearest camera. "You got smart," he said. "Impressive. You used to clean floors. Now you clean corruption." Amara bristled at the words, but didn't interrupt. "But Kane doesn't care. He never did. I was disposable, and so are you." He reached into his coat. Amara flinched, hand hovering near the control panel. But Victor didn't pull a gun. He pulled a phone, held it to the camera. The screen displayed a live feed, a dark room, a tied figure slumped in a chair. Amara leaned forward. Marcus, bloodied lip, conscious, breathing. Amara stood so fast the chair tipped over behind her. "No," she breathed. "We moved him. He was safe." Margaret's fingers flew across the keyboard. "No recent breach on the estate," she said. "That feed, it's delayed. It's not live." Amara's hands trembled. "But it looks real," she whispered. Victor's voice crackled through the speaker again. "He's alive. For now. Kane said you'd like to know that. He said it would make you hesitate." Amara's mouth twisted in fury. Victor stared into the camera. "But I don't work for him anymore." A long pause. Then, slowly, Victor reached into his pocket again and pulled out a flash drive. He placed it on the floor. "This is everything I have. Every dirty job, every bribe, every target. I'm done." Daniel's voice buzzed through the comms. "Do we take him?" Amara exhaled. "Not yet." Victor looked up again. "He has a backup plan. He always does. But this time, he's desperate. He's leaving the country. Tonight, private airstrip. Kingston, New York. Hangar 6. 2 a.m. 1 jet. 1 escort. After that he disappears. Then, calmly, Victor raised his hands. Daniel and 2 agents rushed in, weapons drawn but unfired. Victor didn't resist. He just said, "Tell her I repaid my debt." We could. An hour later, Amara stood over the drive Victor had left. The contents made her knees weak. Audio recordings, wire transfers, instructions from Kane, even photographs of every person Victor had been ordered to kill, including her. "I was on the list," she whispered. Margaret nodded grimly. "And Marcus?" Charles entered the room, having just landed by helicopter. "He gave us Kane's location?" Amara nodded. "Kingston. Tonight." Charles didn't hesitate. "Mobilize. We end this now." End quote. The jet engines purred low as the hangar loomed in the shadows. It was nearly 2 a.m. Outside the chain-link fence, a caravan of unmarked vehicles waited in silence. Inside, Amara, Charles, and a small team of federal agents prepared. "This is it," Charles said. "We get him on that tarmac. We don't let him board." Amara checked her weapon, her eyes steel. "You sure about this?" Daniel asked beside her. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The plan was surgical. Kane was inside Hangar 6, prepping for takeoff with one assistant. A decoy vehicle would approach the hangar doors. Kane would come out. He always wanted visual confirmation. When he did, they'd strike. At 2:07 a.m., the hangar doors slid open. Kane stepped out, flanked by a tall man in a dark overcoat. He was older than his photographs, more weary, but his arrogance untouched. He took one step toward the car. Then the lights flooded the tarmac. "FBI, hands in the air." Kane froze. Dozens of agents emerged from the shadows. He turned slowly, face unreadable. Then he saw her, Amara, stepping out of the vehicle. No disguise, no fear, just truth. "I told you," she said softly. "You don't get another chance." Kane didn't flinch. He stood beneath the blinding tarmac lights like a man who had weathered every storm and still expected to win. His expensive coat fluttered in the wind, his silver hair neat, every gesture deliberate. The agents surrounding him had weapons drawn, voices sharp with command, but Kane smiled. "Amara Knight," he said, voice calm, almost amused. "You finally got your stage." She stepped forward, flanked by Charles and 2 federal officers. Her face was unreadable. Her voice, however, was ice. "This isn't a stage. It's your curtain call." Kane's smirk twitched. "Oh, I like that. Did you write it yourself? Or did Charles feed you that line?" Charles stepped beside her. "She doesn't need help putting you in a cage." Kane's eyes locked on his former friend. "You were always the sentimental one, Charles. All that money, all that legacy, and look where it got you. Depending on a maid." Amara didn't blink. "It got him the truth. And it got me justice." The lead agent stepped up. "Elias Kane, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, medical crimes, under federal statute 18 U.S.C., section 1001, obstruction of justice, attempted murder." Kane raised his hand lazily, almost yawning. Yes. Spare me the list. We both know I won't see the inside of a courtroom." "Keep talking," Amara muttered. "It's all going on record." The agent cuffed him, pressing his face against the car hood. Kane didn't struggle. Instead, he looked up at Amara again, eyes glinting. "You think you've won, don't you? You've bought yourself a few headlines. But this system doesn't protect people like you, Miss Knight. It feeds on them." She leaned in close. "Then it's about time I start feeding it something it can't digest." Back at the estate, the aftermath unfolded quickly. Media coverage exploded within hours. Live footage of Kane being led away in cuffs dominated every network. Vanessa Sloan released a statement confirming her cooperation. Lawmakers called the takedown a landmark case in corporate criminal accountability. And Amara? She stayed mostly silent, not out of fear, but because she was watching, waiting. She knew the story wasn't over. 3 days later, Amara walked the long corridor toward Charles's office. Her steps were steady, but her mind was spinning. Victor had been placed in witness protection. His cooperation had secured him partial immunity. The files on Street Hallorans were now in the hands of federal prosecutors. Elena's name was finally being cleared in public, and still, something gnawed at her. Margaret opened the door before she could knock. "He's expecting you." Inside, Charles sat behind his desk, reading through an official-looking folder. He gestured for her to sit. "I just got off a call with the U.S. Attorney's Office," he said. "They want you in D.C. for a deposition." Amara raised an eyebrow. "Me? You're the reason this case exists. Your statement is the backbone of the prosecution." She nodded slowly. "When?" "Next week. But that's not why I called you in." He slid the folder across the desk. Inside were papers, legal ones. "I had the board draft this yesterday," Charles said. "A proposal. I want you to stay. Not as staff. As a partner. EVP of Ethics and Oversight." Amara blinked. "That's not real." "It is. The company needs new blood. Someone with a spine. Someone who sees the rot before it spreads. You've been that person since day one." She opened her mouth, then closed it. "I don't have the education. Or the resume." "You have what no one else here has," Charles said. "A soul that doesn't bend." Silence. Then, Amara laughed, a dry, disbelieving sound. From folding sheets to folding board decisions, Charles smiled. "It's poetic." She stood, walked to the window. Outside, Eli was running across the lawn, kicking a soccer ball with Marcus. Two unlikely brothers bound by war and survival. "I'll think about it," she said. Charles nodded. "That's all I ask." That night, she walked alone to the chapel on the edge of the property, a small, forgotten building from a century past. No one used it. But tonight, she needed quiet. Inside, dust floated in the light of a single stained glass window. She knelt at the old wooden pew and let herself breathe. And then, she cried, for Elena, for every woman like her, silenced and used, for the part of herself that had to harden just to survive. When the tears stopped, she whispered to the silence, "I'm still here." The silence didn't answer, but somehow, it felt like something sacred had heard her. The next morning, a letter arrived. No postmark, no return address. Inside was a photograph. Her mother, young, holding baby Amara, and on the back, scrawled in crooked handwriting, "You were always meant for more." "Where?" Amara pressed the photo to her chest, then carefully tucked it into her drawer beside the flash drive that changed everything. Justice had come, but the fight wasn't over. It never would be. The courtroom was colder than Amara expected, not just from the air conditioning humming faintly through the ceiling vents, but from the gaze of every person present. Lawyers in tailored suits, reporters scribbling with mechanical precision, and the coldest gaze of all, Elias Caines. He sat across the aisle from her, behind bulletproof glass, dressed in a Navy prison-issue suit that looked far too neat on a man who had orchestrated such chaos. Yet even in shackles, he looked like he still believed the world would bend to his will. Amara didn't flinch. She took her seat in the witness box, straightened her back, and waited for the questioning to begin. The U.S. attorney approached, calm but firm. "State your name for the record." "Amara Knight." Thing. Occupation, former domestic employee. Currently, Executive Vice President, Ethics and Oversight, Whitmore Holdings. A ripple moved through the courtroom. She continued before it faded. "But before any of that, I was just a woman trying to protect a little boy." Her testimony lasted 2 hours. She told them everything: how she first arrived at the estate, how she noticed Victor's behavior, how she discovered the files, the threats, the manipulations. She spoke of Elena's descent, the research at Street Halloran's, the twisted biotechnology empire Cain had built on human pain. She didn't speak with fury. She spoke with truth, and the jury listened. Cain didn't speak once, but his eyes never left her. When it was over, the judge recessed the court. Amara stepped down slowly, legs shaking from adrenaline. Charles was there in the hallway, waiting. He didn't say anything. He simply nodded. She smiled, but only faintly. "Do you think it'll stick?" she asked. Charles didn't pretend. He's rich, connected, dangerous. But now the world knows who he is. Amara folded her arms. "And if the law doesn't break him?" Charles looked at her, his voice quiet. "Then, the legacy will." That evening, Amara returned to the estate alone. The corridors were still. lit only by soft sconces. She walked past the library, past the dining hall, and down the west wing to the family room. Eli was asleep on the couch, a book open on his chest. She carefully tucked a blanket around him, her hand resting on his head just a moment longer than needed. The boy had lost too much for one lifetime, but he had survived, and he was safe now. The next morning, the media declared the trial the corporate reckoning of the decade. More whistleblowers came forward, employees from Elbridge Technologies, former doctors at Street, Halloran's, even 2 private security contractors who had once worked for Kane overseas. But the most surprising call came from overseas itself. Margaret answered it, patched it through to Charles. It was from Geneva, the World Health Ethics Committee. They wanted to meet. A week later, Charles and Amara flew to Switzerland in a private jet. A quiet flight, without champagne or celebration. They didn't go as conquerors. They went as survivors. The meeting was brief, but powerful. The committee reviewed the evidence, praised the internal audit Whitmore Holdings had conducted, and offered something unexpected. A seat. Not just a seat, the chairwoman clarified. A rotating position on the Global Ethics Advisory Board. A voice representing not just corporations, but those caught in their gears. Amara hesitated. I'm not a doctor or a diplomat. The chairwoman smiled. No, you're something rarer. You're honest. On the flight home, Charles broke the silence. Elena would have liked you. Amara looked at him, the Atlantic Ocean shimmering below them. I hope she would have seen me. She would have, he said. She always noticed the people no one else did. Amara nodded. Maybe that's why I noticed her too. They didn't speak the rest of the flight. Some memories are too sacred for words. Back in the States, Amara returned to the estate not as a maid but as something else entirely. She had her own office now, her own staff, a title, but some things never changed. She still walked the halls at night when she couldn't sleep, still checked on Eli, still folded laundry when her mind needed calming. One night, she found herself outside the guest house. Marcus had decided to stay for good, taking a role in logistics and supply chain operations. It was a big step for someone who used to work nights at a loading dock, but Amara knew he had the fire. She knocked on his door. He opened, holding 2 mugs of coffee. Didn't even need to text you, he said. I knew you'd show. They sat on the porch, listening to the night birds. You ever think about Mom? Marcus asked softly. All the time, Amara replied. What do you think she'd say? Amara sipped the coffee. She'd say, make it count. And then she'd hit me with a shoe for staying up too late. Marcus laughed. Yeah, that sounds like her. A beat. I'm proud of you, sis. She smiled. I'm proud of us. Dops. Later, alone in her room, Amara pulled out the old photo again. Her mother, her baby self, the quiet strength that had carried them through. She thought of the girl she used to be, the one scrubbing dishes, hoping for tips, praying for safety. That girl hadn't dreamed of boardrooms or international tribunals. She had dreamed of dignity. Now she was building it for others, not just with justice but with legacy. Spring arrived early that year. The estate's garden bloomed in gentle defiance of the harsh winter that had come before. Tulips stretched toward the sun like children tasting freedom for the first time. Birds returned to the trees, and with them, a rhythm of normalcy that Amara had almost forgotten was possible. She stood beneath the weeping willow in the back courtyard, the same spot where Elena used to sit and read before the illness consumed her. A bench had been restored there. Fresh paint, a plaque engraved with Elena's name. Not flashy, just true. In truth, she bloomed, even in silence. Amara traced the words with her fingers. Justice doesn't always roar, she whispered. Sometimes it just sits and breathes. Inside the main house, preparations were underway for an event Charles had once promised himself he'd never host again: an open house for local foster families and adoption centers. Not a gala, not a press stunt, just warmth, food, music, a chance for Eli and children like him to play without worry, without whispers. Eli had taken to his new life with a mix of joy and cautious hope. The nightmares had slowed. The questions still came, but they were softer now. Less about survival, more about growth. That morning, Amara found him tying his own tie in the mirror. He frowned at the knot. Too tight? He asked. She walked over, gently fixed it. Just enough to hold it together. He looked up at her reflection. You still check on me every night. She smiled. Of course I do. Even though I don't cry anymore? Especially because you don't, she said. He nodded. You think Mom would have come today? Amara paused. I think she never left. Marcus was in the kitchen grilling hot dogs, apron stained, music playing from a Bluetooth speaker. His laughter echoed as he argued with one of the foster kids about the best superhero. Margaret, clipboard in hand, tried her best to keep order, but even she couldn't resist the temptation to take off her heels and kick a soccer ball once the game started. Daniel stood off to the side, chatting with a social worker he had softened in recent months, the weight of his past jobs dissolving slowly in the presence of children and second chances. Charles watched it all from the veranda, a glass of iced tea in hand, eyes scanning not for threats but for meaning. Amara joined him. Well, she said, we're officially no longer at war. Charles chuckled. That's dangerous talk. She raised an eyebrow. You afraid of peace? He took a slow sip. Just not used to it. They stood there in companionable silence, the warm sun pressing against their backs, laughter in the air like a salve. Then Charles turned serious. There's something I've been meaning to give you, he said. He pulled out a slim leather journal. Its pages aged, its cover worn. Elena kept this, he said. She wrote everything in it. Ideas, poems, grief, questions. She never let me read it. But in her will, she asked that I give it to someone who could carry what she couldn't. He placed it in Amara's hands. She asked for you. Amara opened the first page. There was no greeting, just a sentence. If the world won't bend to justice, let us bend toward each other. Amara closed the book gently, pressing it to her chest. She was brilliant. Is not to her. She was, Charles said. So are you. Later that evening, the last of the guests trickled out. The courtyard lights dimmed. Music faded. Leftovers were packed. And laughter lingered like incense. Amara sat alone by the fire pit, watching embers curl toward the stars. Charles walked over. No tie, no pretense. I spoke to the governor today, he said. He asked if I was planning to run for office. Said we could use more men who knew what rock bottom looked like. Amara laughed. And what did you say? I told him I knew someone better. She shook her head. Oh no, I'm staying right here. I like watching the flowers bloom. He nodded. Then maybe I'll stay too. A breeze rustled the trees. The fire cracked softly. Amara stared at the flames. I used to think justice was loud, she said. That it had to be shouted, demanded, forced. She turned to him. But maybe justice is something you live. Quietly, consistently. Charles raised his glass. To the quiet fighters. She raised hers. To the ones no one saw coming. They clinked their glasses. The night didn't cheer. It didn't need to, because peace had finally come. Not as a headline, not as applause, but as the sound of a child sleeping in safety, the smell of soil after rain, the quiet that follows the storm. This story reminds us that true justice isn't always served in courtrooms or headlines. It's often built quietly, through courage, persistence, and the refusal to look away when others suffer. Amara, once overlooked as just a maid, shows us that integrity has no rank, and that even in the shadows, we can choose to stand for what's right. The greatest power lies not in wealth or status, but in the ability to protect, to speak up, and to carry forward the truth, especially when no one else will.